We're excited to introduce this series of video bites to help you and your students create amazing experiences and build in demand skills for success in school and even after graduation. In this bite, we'll share how Adobe Creative Cloud doesn't just give your students Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator, the world's best apps for creating incredible designs. It also empowers you to turn artwork created in those apps into 3D brand visualizations, product mockups, and spatial designs in Adobe Dimension, as well as designing augmented reality or AR experiences using Adobe Aero. So let's explore the 3D and AR tools, starting with Adobe Dimension. With Adobe Dimension, you can create engaging 3D content with high-quality models, materials, and lighting. Dimension actually makes it easy to build brand visualizations, things like product mockups, etc., using artwork from Illustrator and Photoshop. For this example, you can see how Photoshop imagery and a logo and pattern created in Illustrator create the visual story you see here. Starting in Adobe Illustrator, say that you set up a logo or other content like this pattern. Now, in order to visualize what that logo would look like on a sign or maybe packaging, you can use this content in Dimension to map it to a 3D model you find directly in Dimension or Adobe Stock and other sources. Now, in order to focus on one of the logos, you can separate it onto its own artboard. In Dimension, you'll be able to choose which artboard you want to display the artwork for. With this content ready, you can head over to Dimension to start your project. In Dimension, you can start a new project quickly. On the canvas, you can import 3D models, imagery, and more to make up your scene. From the Starter Assets panel or importing models in a variety of formats you have, you can add them to your scene. I'll search for and drag in a coffee cup, and I'll do the same for a bag. Now, once they're in place, the tools you see here for editing are really pretty intuitive. Using keyboard modifiers, you can switch between them, like R for rotate or V for move. With our models in place, you can add artwork created in Illustrator or Photoshop. Now, if you come to a model like the coffee cup, you can double-click on it to select part of the model you want to edit. You can then add a graphic here, like the Illustrator logo. Notice that it's a native Illustrator file. You can then choose how to apply it as a graphic or even as a pattern fill, so maybe you can layer content. You can choose which artboard to show from the native file, even going back to Illustrator or Photoshop, making edits and coming right back to see the updates. With the logo in place, you can then make a few adjustments as necessary. Now I'll add a pattern to the bag similar to what we just did using an Illustrator file. But this time I'll make it a pattern fill and then apply some adjustments. Now in Photoshop, you can also create artwork to use in Dimension, like logos, those that you see here, maybe a background image to put your models on, and more. With those files saved in a supported format, like PSD or native Photoshop, they can now be imported into Dimension. And once again, each of these is on a separate artboard, so I can choose which artboard to use once I place them in Dimension. To add the Photoshop logo to the bag, I'll double-click on the bag to select it. I'll apply the logo and make some adjustments. When working with models, you can see that the content you applied shows as layers that you can control the ordering and appearance of. Okay, with the models almost finished, you can start to turn your attention to the scene. You can import an image to show behind, maybe a table or shelf to place the objects on. And while you can import Photoshop files and other supported images, you can also simply grab one of the included images over here. Once it's in, you can let Dimension do the heavy lifting of matching the models to the image by clicking Match Image. You can see that it did a great job of making the models look like they're in the correct plane and more. With that finished, you can adjust lighting for the environment and maybe make some final tweaks. The final step is to render or export your artwork. You can render locally or in the cloud depending on your machine and internet speed. You can also export to multiple formats and options, even to a layered PSD file. That way, after you render it, you can open the PSD in Photoshop to further fine-tune your work. Using Adobe Aero, you can design and share augmented reality experiences using assets you've created in Adobe Photoshop, Illustrator, and other places. Adobe Aero makes it easy for you to build AR experiences without the need to code. All you have to do is import your 2D and 3D original assets into Aero, place them in a physical space, and add interactivity. To start a project in Aero, you can tap to create. Now, the first thing you do is set a surface anchor. This makes a trackable position in the physical environment that orients AR content to real-world space so that content stays where you want it to stay. When you set a surface anchor, you can place your assets on it and come back to the same point to see the placed objects. Now you can add different types of content. Back in Adobe Dimension, this museum sign object was dragged in and artwork from Illustrator was added to it as a decal. Once your Dimension artwork looks good, the artwork you create in here can be exported and brought into Aero to use it in your scene. Back in Aero, you can import that Dimension content. I saved it to Creative Cloud so I can get it from there. I'll tap to place it. With the asset in place, you can adjust the content to make it fit your scene. You can do this by dragging on your screen, or you can adjust the content using the tools down here. You can also incorporate assets from Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator as well. I'm going to incorporate in Illustrator here this banner artwork to try and put it on the sign. I can export as SVG or a layered Photoshop file from Illustrator to preserve the layers in Aero. So back in Aero, I'll import that content. Once again, I saved it to Creative Cloud so I can just pull it from there. With it in place, I'll try to do an adjustment here to get it close to the sign. I'll actually incorporate some of the included artwork that comes with Aero as well. There's a great dinosaur asset that actually has an animation built in that would work perfect for this. There it is. After I get it out there, I'll fix it up by positioning it and scaling it a little as well. Now with Aero, you can also add actions to your assets to make them show and hide, move, and a lot more. By selecting content like the dinosaur and tapping behaviors down here, you can set what's called a trigger. This is what needs to happen in order to run an action. I'm going to tap Start, and this is going to tell Aero to run the action at the start. You can then tap Action, and you can choose an action from the list. Now we can add more than one action to something, but we want this dinosaur to run an animation that's already there, so tap Animate. The animation should already be chosen, but if there was more than one, you could choose it here. You can set options like the number of times and more. To see it happen, at the top here, tap Play, and you should see a roaring dinosaur. You can share your experience with others or post it to social media with a link or video capture of your artwork. Students can also use Adobe Portfolio, which is a part of Creative Cloud, to present their ideas to the world in an online portfolio, and take these projects and assets that they've worked so hard on with them when they graduate. And with the new licensing options, students can use Creative Cloud on their own computers and devices, not just in classrooms and labs. With more than 20 Creative Cloud apps and services, students can learn to explore the creative process, express their ideas, and communicate with impact. Visit this URL for more video bites and information on bringing Creative Cloud to your students.